I really believe that inherently, if you stay static for more, even 3 months in this industry, you're likely to be missing out on opportunities of arbitrage, and your job is essentially to generate the best return on ad spend. So you should not miss out on those opportunities if you want to justify your salary.
Welcome to Mobile Growth and Pancakes, a podcast by StoreMaven. We break down how and why mobile apps grow. In each episode, we invite a mobile growth expert onto the show to break down a specific mobile growth strategy, how it worked, why it worked, and what they would do differently. I'm your host, Esther Shatz. Welcome to Mobile Growth and Pancakes. I'm joined today by Fabien-Pierre Nicolas, who I'm very excited to have. Fabien, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
Yeah, so the name is Fabien-Pierre Nicolas. Essentially, I've been working at SmartNews for 3.5 years, running the mobile growth. My background is primarily like mobile games. I've worked at DNA, Perfect World, and a few other places like Ubisoft. And at core, I'm leading and making sure the app is growing in the US. We are a leading global news discovery app.
Okay, I have to ask about the transition from gaming to non-gaming and what that was like. Do you find that your atmosphere is completely different? Is the work completely different, or it's same animal?
I think, I will almost put it as like you're changing business model, but as well you're changing consumer base. So, there is like two mindset change, right? Like gaming, at least the type of gaming I was in charge of, you're mostly monetizing core gamers around in-app payments. So you have a few percent of your audience that generate like all your revenue, and the rest that's mostly enjoying for free games they will otherwise have to pay for. And I think, it's extremely interesting. It's like, so you have to be very focused in terms of the channels and the product, and you have, generally speaking, high LTV for those users. And my current business model at SmartNews is the exact opposite. So our use case is very broad, right? Over half of the people in the US are connecting with news on a daily or at least weekly basis. But at the same time, your lifetime value is much lower, right? So you have to create very different solutions versus when I was in gaming. And I think that's essentially engaging for me. And I think a lot of the mobile marketers that made the transition from gaming to non-gaming is you have to rethink the way you approach mobile marketing and the way you approach your stack and the way you approach your team. So that's, and for me, that was exciting to just change after almost 10 years in gaming.
Pretty cool. So let's talk about KPIs. I mean, if you're not going after the whales and you're not going after kind of the in-app purchase and the lifetime value the same way, how do you measure growth? What's your kind of key KPIs? What are you looking for?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So I think I always tend to divide in two types of bucket, right? First, there is the short term. So our perspective, and I guess a good proxy metrics we selected against the long-term LTV is the cost per day 7. So we define a loyal users as someone will start using our app and stick around for more than 7 days. Then they are likely to stick around for a pretty long time period. So we optimize first against the cost per day 7 loyal user. And then we take a look, of course, on a long term. Ultimately, we sample a certain time period, for example, 2 weeks and 30 days. And we look at whether we're recouping or not against a projected 720 days, so 2 years lifetime value. Again, as I say, past 7 days, our retention curve is relatively flat. So I think as a result, we could take the 2 weeks and 4 week sample and extrapolate to 2 years. And that's typically what we optimize against. And of course, there is a lot of other metrics we look at, right, on a daily basis that are engagement and monetization related, but I'm mostly speaking about what we optimize for the acquisition side, which is what I'm leading.
Makes sense. And can you give me kind of a rough idea of scale? What's the audience size approximately that we're looking at? You don't need exact numbers.
So I think what's nice with SmartNews compared to some of my previous companies, we're extremely focused on two key markets. One is Japan, and the second one is the US. So globally, we have over 50 million installed, and we have over 20 million monthly active users. That makes us essentially on the Japan side, we're number one app and news app. So like I think our next competitor is probably like about 3 times smaller according to App Annie compared to SmartNews. So clearly market leader, very high awareness as well. In the US, we're more on the challenger position. We already entered the top 5. So we're right behind, let's say, Google News on Android in terms of total time spent. But again, we're top 5. We're not yet number 1. So that's what we aspire to be.
Nice. Oh, we could go on a whole other tangent about Japan versus US and kind of the different sides there, because of the two markets to really go after. Those are very distinct markets. There's
Yeah.
I'm sure many interesting insights from that too. But I'd love to talk today about, I mean, I think when you think about mobile and you think about kind of app optimization, a lot of thought goes into performance marketing. A lot of thought goes into kind of that more rapid feedback UA, maybe I guess I would call it. And I know you guys have dipped into the TV market, and I'd love to get an understanding of, let's start with what made you consider TV. What was the thought process that went into going and starting there?
Yeah, so I think both in Japan and in the US, we have leveraged TV for an extended period of time as a channel to keep growing, essentially. And so the way we looked at it is we, at the time, so it was like circa late 2017, early 2018 for Japan, and then mid 2018 for the US. We took a look and we say, okay, let's look at a series of conditions. Are we struggling to find a new mobile or online channel that's return on ad spend positive? And that's pretty much a yes or no question, right? So have you been experimenting with a lot of things that are not working out or not? The second one is, are we spending pretty good amount per month, right? Like, let's say $1 million plus in the US, aka like you have essentially the capability to spend at scale, and need to find another channel that's have some scale. The third one is, do we understand the target audience, and could we express in like 15 seconds, let's say, the value proposition of the product? And then, do we have a significant chunk of our audience that's over 40? That's especially true for the US. Japan TV audience is a little bit younger. Last but not least, that would have been the dream, but celebrity endorsement or well-known IP could help, right? So taking a look at those 5 things, we were like, well, we're not meeting the last one, well-known IP, celebrity endorsement. However, we're definitely in the 4 other buckets at the time that I'm discussing. Therefore, we decided to go forward and test TV as the channel, and that worked extremely well in Japan and quite well as well in the US.
Okay, so how do you start? I mean, when it comes to TV, it's not a cheap experiment necessarily to play around with. Do you have a light version, a dip the toe in and kind of feel the waters of TV, or do you have to go all in?
Well, no, I definitely think like every channel that you're running for performance, you could, test / dip your toes into TV and then see if it's working or not for us. So I will say recommendation, and as well, like all the agencies were pretty consistent there, and we did the math afterwards as well to check that those budget recommendation made sense, is to have at least $200,000 in the US if you want to test TV. Why? Well, first, you need to build creative. So even if you're trying to keep it scrappy and cheap, you're probably looking at like, 30, 40K, right, to make a few creatives happen. And that's when you work with cost-efficient agencies. So 200K, boom, you have 40K, let's say, that goes to creative, right? And then the $160,000 that's left will allow you to test the creative / channel. So let's say CNN or ABC and so on, and then day part, right? CNN primetime is not the same as early morning and so on and so forth. So you want to really test those different permutations with the 160K you have left. And this budget should give you a few things. That should give you the capability to measure, let's say if you are doing that for like 3 weeks, what is the incrementality versus your baseline of organic users, and what's working better for your product, as I say, in terms of creative and channel and day parts. So I think, depending on your product, right, you will have produce creative, you will have different, different options in terms of channels and day parts. So taking 2 examples, Calm was working really well for them was evenings, because it's about relaxing and sleeping. So evenings, typically late evenings, have like very low CPMs. So they could arbitrage and focus on CPMs. For us, it was about the high attention time, right, on news channel. Why? Because we're about news, right? So we needed not so much low CPMs, but really high response rate. Ultimately, that's what worked better for us. So, it's hard to predict depending on the app that people are promoting what will be best. And that's why you need essentially this 160K testing budget.
To play around with the different kind of slots. You mentioned incrementality testing and how you kind of measure over the organic baseline. I think that's something that prevents a lot of developers from going into more kind of brand marketing side of things is, how can we accurately measure it? Can we accurately attribute it, especially if there's other, usually things don't happen in a vacuum, so there are other activities going on. Can you share a bit about how you narrow in and kind of confidently attribute changes to the TV campaign and create some kind of ROI calculation for that?
Yeah. Well, I think, both in Japan and the US, we had a fairly clean slate when it comes to offline or untracked activities, I will say. So that's, the first caveat, right? Versus like companies were running like millions of dollars of outdoor and so on at the same time. So taking that into consideration, we really had like two attribution logic in parallel. The first one is we did look at, what was the baseline, essentially the number of organics per day for a period of 2 weeks before we started TV. And then, what was the new average for the following 2 weeks, right, when we did TV. And that's essentially just, okay, this is the TV incrementality. But then, that does not allow you to optimize for specific TV channels or creative and so on, right? So for that, we used a tool called TV Square, which was integrated with our MMP, Adjust. And essentially, TV Square, what they do is you pass them all your organic install. For each of them, they will give a fractional value to say whether a user came from TV or not. And this fractional value is based on ingesting all the times that your TV ad aired and taking a 5 to 10 minutes, depending on the amount of money you spend on the given ad window, and give each of those users the fractional value, add all those fractions, and essentially say, okay, you had 15 style coming from this ad, for example. So that's, I will say, the baseline attribution we had for our campaign. And then pretty quickly, we noticed a few things could be added. The first one is you could measure the age and gender of the users coming from TV ad through Apple Search. Of course, it's just a sample, right? It's the user searching on iOS. So it doesn't give you a perspective on Android and so on. But, it was
Better than
nothing. Yeah, exactly. The other thing we noticed is that there was a re-engagement effect. TV help getting lapsed user back into the product. And then, last but not least, one thing we figured out relatively quickly through interview of peers was, you need to reestablish the baseline, of course. And so about every 3 months, right, like in our case, the impact was declining relatively quickly when we post TV. So we were pausing the campaigns, waiting two to 3 weeks, sort of a blackout period, and then remeasuring the new baseline for organics for 2 weeks, and then restarting TV.
Yeah. So basically, my next question was if you kind of saw any longer term impacts. I mean, were you able to maybe move up in rankings anywhere, or you're saying it's kind of it's a quick hump and that's what you've got?
Well, okay. So I think it's, there is like the install impact, right? Which, as I mentioned, relatively quickly in about 48 hours was going back to baseline. So maybe we were almost like too good at triggering immediately installs. We had like watermark and so on and so forth. But on the other end, from an awareness perspective, which again wasn't the primary goal for the campaign, we were not going to TV to create awareness, but you do create re-engagement and you do create awareness. That was a lasting impact for our product, where we increased by, give or take, about 50% awareness pre-TV versus post-TV. So I think there was a benefit in terms of building attributes like trust, building attributes like, okay, it's known content, right? It's a known entity for the users.
Yeah, I think there's definitely something I'd say, even especially outside of the gaming world, this concept of you don't necessarily need the same immediate gratification. In games, you kind of, somebody's looking to play now and they're not, there's not a lot of kind of re-trigger, whereas something like news, for example, might become relevant to you at a later time. And you kind of have that, when you search for something and then you see smart news and you remember that smart news is something you've heard of and they're legit, you kind of have that secondary trust impact, which I think is obviously almost impossible to measure because you can't follow people's memories all the way down, but still makes for something that you might not have in the same way in other kind of performance marketing sides.
Yeah.
I'm curious, did you guys change anything, in terms of aligning with the TV creatives that you use? Were you changing anything in the onboarding side, in the product side, maybe even top of the funnel side, any kind of creatives, or was it, TV campaign kind of stood on its own and everything else ran exactly as normal?
Yeah. Well, so in terms of onboarding, I know like some companies do the "Where did you hear about us?" survey, and especially when they're running offline, especially when they're running multiple channels offline, which wasn't our case, right? So in this perspective, both in terms of we were pretty constrained in terms of resources. The team was much smaller than what it is today. And essentially, we were running only on one offline channel, at least in the US. Japan was starting to diversify pretty quickly, but did not add that to the onboarding. So we kept the onboarding as it was. The onboarding was already aligned in terms of the messaging of news from all sides was already included in our App Store page and in our product. But what was really interesting is as well the user feedback loops, right? Depending on which ad they were coming from, you definitely could tell that we've impacted, like the reviews, both some good reviews and bad reviews, versus the claim, depending of what we were running mostly in terms of TV ads.
So how do you go into the creative side of a TV campaign? I mean, you mentioned the one bucket you didn't have was IP endorsement, kind of that side. What's the process like there? How do you create a TV creative? It's much more than just kind of one quick image that you're seeing on an ad.
Yeah. Also, first, to give credit, so I benefited. My boss at the time, Nishiguchi-san, was our SVP marketing, was running a TV campaign, right, for about 3-4 months. So when I started planning, they were about 3 months in. So he was like, "We failed on a bunch of things. Let me at least give you my few pointers." And his first pointer was essentially to tell me agencies, regardless of how awesome they claim they are, doing 15 seconds ads are not awesome at 15 seconds ads. They are mostly using creative talent that is trained at 30 seconds or 60 seconds script writing. So it's like, essentially, you're gonna have to be a script writer. Are you game for that? And I was like, yeah, I think so. I have someone in my team as well that is a native speaker I was able to use for copy editing and review. And so that's the first thing, right? If you want to run 15, which is typically much more cost efficient because 30 seconds tend to cost double, right? You don't get a special discount for buying a 30-second ad. You will need to be involved in this process. And then the second aspect is for the rest, it's performance, right? Therefore, you need to have different hypotheses that are relatively different one from another, and then measure the response rate, the essentially ratio of impressions to number of installs you generate. In our case, right, we had a more general, like, here is why news matters. We had one that was more like feature driven. Hey, you could read news offline in a plane or when you're like the countryside without 4G connection. And we had two that were about politics because context-wise, right, that was about 2 months before the midterms. So it was a very polarized environment, and we wanted to show that the product was bringing both sides together and providing a benefits to both sides. And that was the claim used from all sides. So again, keep applying the good old principle of performance marketing when it comes to creative, where you do have very different hypotheses. Don't have like 3 or 4 ads that are all the same, because the difference is going to be minimal one from another.
No, 100%, especially when you have to give it that level of kind of investment before you go in and validate the results. You definitely want to make sure you have things to validate that'll give you clear answers. When you find, let's say you find a creative that really, it's powerful, it's showing, it's converting, what would you say the lifespan for something like that is? How often can you reuse it until people get sick of it and stop performing?
So, for better or for worse, we really had a tough time beating a winner. In subsequent, we did another round of 4 ads, and none of them won against the previous round winner. And so I think we were able to run it for, easily 3-4 months before we started seeing creative fatigue, knowing that, again, I think ultimately it all depends on the level of budget you're deploying, right? If after your initial test of 200K, you start spending 10 million a month, probably the same thing. We were in much more modest budgets monthly. So I think as a result, the saturation of the audience wasn't as fast as it could have been if we were like hyper aggressive with our TV buy. Like one limiting factor, I will say, of this creative fatigue, if you're sticking to performance, right, where you buy the week before, essentially this heavily discounted inventory, rather than doing those like a quarter in advance, you will have weeks where you get like easily, if you want to spend 2, 3, 400K, you could spend it. And a good example is the weeks after Christmas. But you will have other weeks where you try to spend 3 or 400K and you actually end up running 100K. So again, I will not worry about it if you're planning a campaign more for like a quarter. If you're indeed planning for a campaign that will be like year-long campaign nonstop, then I think planning for creative refresh every 3-4 months makes sense ahead of time, and that means planning for budget, right? If you're talking to your CFO.
Okay, so let's kind of review. You kind of touched on a lot of the steps of what you go through when you're setting up a TV campaign. So first thing is your 5 buckets, making sure that you hit at least 3, 4. Does it do you have a magic number there, or just
Well, from my perspective, at least, we were at 4 out of 5. I'll definitely not go at it if you have like less than not 3 or more. This is a big time and money commitment, so you need to have a pain point, in short. So that's, I think, the first point is to establish, yes, I have a pain point. The second step, I will say, typically, because we're talking about a good amount of money, a good amount of time, I'll make sure you have support from your management, your C-suite, right? That you're not the one like deciding, okay, I'm going to carve out a little bit of budget and go, because this is high touch in the extent that, traditionally speaking, TV campaigns, everybody have an opinion about it. So you want to sell them in, get them excited, sell in your CFO or VP finance, again, so that it's not just running the tests, that if it becomes a channel, they're aware of it, they plan for budget lines and so on and so forth. And I do think the metrics we just discussed typically help, right, in terms of selling it in strategically, as well as the creative concept you might have on how you're gonna, what channel are you gonna leverage, what is the cost and so on. The third step, if you get the green light, is typically finding an agencies that understand mobile KPI. You will think that everybody would tell you they understand mobile app too, but actually, just having them, do a request for proposal, and essentially you have them present to you how they will go about it for the test campaign. You'll be surprised by the amount of agency claiming that mobile experience who actually don't really understand things in details when you come down to it and start asking questions. And they should be able to provide you a high-level media planning, a few creative concepts, and so on and so forth. And again, you really need to analyze those 4 or 5 agencies you're talking to on a matrix. So you have preset criteria and you analyze, okay, each of them, whether you feel they're strong, they're medium, or they're a little bit on the weaker side. Because otherwise you have a perception bias, right? You will go for the VP sales you like, or the co-founder of the agency you like, versus going for what's truly the best choice for your company. And among those things, I will look to the ad experience, not just in mobile app and of mobile apps, but as well, ideally, in my bucket. So in our case, will it be content, right? Ideally news. And then last but not least, you need to get your analytics ready. I did mention that, you could work with TV Square is pretty much like almost standard. They work with AppsFlyer, Adjust, and I think a bunch of other MMPs, and just make sure that they're going to start receiving the data when your campaign starts. And then, my last advice, because some agency are just relying on weekly emails, is I did find it very helpful for my team and for the agency if during the test, at least you have a weekly sync call. So you could go over the metrics, you could discuss the next steps, and have a, could grasp on what's happening, so you could again have a feedback loop with your top management, and build this trust.
And then I guess I'd say if you could do it all again, is there anything you'd do differently?
I think I will just, again, make sure that I discuss the follow-up budget more quickly, and essentially plan for success. It's probably one advice. Like, we tend to always focus so much on getting the test budget approved, but ultimately, you need to think ahead. It's probably one thing I could have done at least a little bit better. And the other thing is, we could probably have worked more closely, even more closely, with the Japan team, and have them, for example, measure some of the baseline, and then going dark for 2 or 3 weeks and so on before we started our own campaign, since they were already live. So I'll say, if you have the luxury of working for a global company where there is some experience, make sure you tap into that. It ended up working the other way around. We brought back this experience to them, but I think we could have just be ready a few months ahead. And I think, last but not least, don't hesitate to bring like other people, for example, UI UX designer and so on, to give you feedback on the creative side. Is, I think, at least for the first round, we did it a little bit more in isolation as a marketing group. And I think the second round, when we brought people from our product team, for example, that was helpful. Like, they catch a few things, but as well provided us with more assets than what we had initially. So I will say it's worth collaborating on that, even though it will feel like, oh my God, I'm opening the door to a lot more feedback and revisions and so on. I think as long as you manage expectations, saying maybe we have 1 or 2 rounds of edits and that's it, and because we have this timeline to hit, I think people are reasonable, and they again provide a lot more value than the time you may need to manage them.
Yeah, I have to say it's one of the things when we talk about, any kind of creative testing, at some point you have to find somebody who's not in the process and who hasn't gone through all of your edits, and kind of pull them in and say, what do you see? Like, being able to pull out of, you get that blindness of you're so close to it that you can sometimes skip the things that you took for granted, and somebody else can spot it in 2 seconds, and you're like, oh, right, that would have been a disaster. So I'm totally with you there. And I guess the last question I have on this topic, and I'm sure you're not, predicting the future of TV, but it's worth bringing up. We're in a weird zone TV-wise, right? Like, people are shifting the way that they're consuming their typical TV content. You mentioned that audience over 40 is a big factor of kind of when you're going to TV. Do you think we'll be able, do you think there's any kind of scenario where TV becomes obsolete? Do you think we'll be able to replicate, the effects of a TV campaign on a streaming platform rather than kind of through traditional TV?
So for now, to your point, at least in the US, I see a split in age, right? And I believe it's happening as well in Europe, between like a 40, 45 plus audience that's still using linear TV heavily, a younger audience that's more using it for very special events that are only available on the platform. Typically, Super Bowl could be one, or big sports events, right? That have exclusive rights for TV channel. You will have as well, like we've seen it, democratic debates, as well as the general election debates, right? Will be a thing that a lot of more people are consuming linear TV on different devices, not necessarily in the TV, but there's still this moment in time where a lot of this audience, younger audience, still watches linear TV. I think the one challenge, and I this is like indirect experience versus direct on OTT and all those services. Well, first, the biggest OTT service is not using advertising, right? Netflix, and it's a huge amount of time people are spending on this service. And it's the case as well for Amazon Video, and a growing chunk of the Hulu users who subscribe to the premium service and so on. You have a lot of eyeballs who are not available for purchase, A. And then B, the problem is the ecosystem being, as I said, limited by all the opt-out and fragmented. It's extremely inefficient and extremely high CPM. So comparatively to what you will get on linear TV, right? You will pay, easily 5 to 10 times more, right, for a similar set of impressions. So I think I have a tougher time in our business model, which is, as I say, broad use case, lower LTV, to imagine how OTT inventory could be competitive for an audience under 45 compared to mobile inventory. So I will say, to reach this audience for now, I much rather, and we've tested podcasts and so on, I much rather still go to mobile marketing. Now for 45 plus, as I say, there is still the capability to do that. And the truth is, for I think the 18 to 40 something, right, there is the competition of influencer that is real. And you have to think like, well, what is going to be my reach on a given, show on Hulu or equivalent services at a given time versus, the amount of video views some of the influencer could get on YouTube or Instagram or TikTok and the likes, right? In terms of velocity and therefore capability to measure the uplift. So, who knows if TV, I think TV, because there is, ultimately habits are survive for a pretty good period of time. So I think the audience that's now 45 plus, let's say, will keep aging and staying on the linear TV side. I think the younger audience, well, I wish I had a great answer to that, but for now, I think we'll mostly rely on mobile marketing, and then we experiment with the other channels. But my hunch is that influencer, at least in many verticals, will probably be more efficient and provide more velocity compared to OTT.
To say I really like that comparison, because I see it, kind of from the measurement side of the way you kind of structure TV, the way you structure measurement is really similar to how you do it with influencer. It's kind of that same effect of, do I get people to search? Do I get them trying to find my brand now? The effect timeline is somewhat similar. I guess, I think one of the challenges when it comes to influencer marketing is you don't have the same control that you have in a TV ad, meaning you don't get to craft, your exact message and choose, the slots when to play it. Obviously there's different influencer channels, but there's a wide range of how influencers will bring in your content and how effective it is. And you kind of don't get to, at least at this point in time, you don't get to access that the way you have with TV. But I do think you're right that, that just it's not conducive to the streaming experience to have the same kind of ad structure the way you have in I'll out myself, I'm not over 45, but I do still watch actual traditional TV in addition to my streaming habits. You're so much more willing to tolerate ads there because it's part of the experience than you are when you're online, and it's somehow infinitely more frustrating when you're streaming and there's 2 ads versus like a whole ad break on TV.
Yeah. No, and I think, to your point, there is influencer marketing where you have much less control, and then there is the ad, right? We have full control, right? When, where. I think what's interesting is, and disclaimer, I know Eric, and I've worked with him on a small game studio I'm advising on a campaign recently. I think what's interesting is now you're going to probably, you're seeing a diversification in influencer from, this video today is brought to you by like 5 seconds, 10 seconds, intro or mid rolls. That was, I think, a standard. You had the sneaky, like influencer content where they were not mentioning they were actually, influencer content, which I think now is going down because the platform have been cracking down on that and saying, no, hey, you need to mention when you're actually being sponsored for an event by a brand. And I think you're going to see as well the influencer realizing like they are celebrating their own rights. And I think, the link I've shared is just one example, but I think you're going to see a lot more of people realizing like maybe there is a middle ground between the two, between like full control and no control, where you have the influencer but more in a produced creative, and you leverage that as the equivalent to an endorsement, right, where you have Tom Hanks selling you something right on TV ads and so on, except you're using an influencer for that. I think it's a space that's exciting. It's still a space that having tested recently, for example, the uplift for organic, there is there's a great deal of so-called platforms, but I think not a lot of them have done the integration work on the analytics to really, saying, okay, pass me back the data, let me slice it, dice it for you, so you have a good idea of what happened there. Not just on the directly attributed install, but as well on the uplift. So they tend to look a lot at just like, oh, people have used this code, this is a number of people, but they miss out on the incrementality.
100%, they miss the entire kind of branding effect that happens there. Okay, I'm moving into the quick fire round now of questions we ask everyone who joins us. First one is, if you could give just one tip to somebody who's thinking about entering the mobile growth marketing space, what would it be?
Well, I think always be testing. It's, the mentality I'm trying to have with the team. And that means you need to plan for time and budget for that. But it's always good to do 80% on like proven channels and so on, where you do some optimization, but like make sure you test like new channels, make sure you test new targeting, new products, and don't be shy about asking for ad credit from your ad platform sometimes about that. But I really believe that inherently, if you stay static for more, even 3 months in this industry, you're likely to be missing out on opportunities of arbitrage. And your job is essentially to generate the best return on ad spend. So you should not miss out on those opportunities if you want to justify your salary.
It's a good one. What's your favorite mobile growth resource?
Oof, there is a lot. So I think, I'm gonna go from the short form to maybe like slightly longer form. So I really, from a quick read perspective, and as well, like Eric's offered, Mobile Dev Memo, his tweets, the blog. I think he's doing a great job on the insights part, right? But as well, his writing is incisive, and typically he's using very punchy header images. I just love that. I did only like 18 months of content marketing in my past life at Penny, but ultimately I think that does make it for a fun read, and so I'm hooked. I think short form still, Apps Flyer, I really like what they're doing with their whiteboard videos, right? You invite a marketer, so it's coming from someone in the industry, not from Apps Flyer themselves. And ultimately, they do a great job because in 3 or 4 minutes, you will get content that's easy to digest and understand about topics that are really covered in depth at the same time, which is, I think, really hard to do. It takes a lot of like scripting and planning around it. So that's the two short format I enjoy. And longer one, beyond the present one on podcast side, which is more recent, I think Branch is doing a really solid job for, in terms of podcast interview. Mada is doing a great mix of like expertise, but as well tackling the human side of the people she interviewed. And then still slightly longer format. Liftoff did a great job on having mobile lunches, right? In period of pandemic, you can't just go and chat with colleagues and so on about things or easily meet people one-on-one for lunches. And so that was great to be able to chat like weekly. And kudos to Dennis and his team because they really jumped on that. I think started, I want to say in May, and it lasted, and the last cycle was like in November. So it was great, and we were getting free lunches at the same time, so can't say no to that.
So speaking of lunch, my next question is, who in the kind of growth industry, assuming that we can go back to normal at some point, you get to take anyone to lunch that you want, face to face, real life, who are you taking and why?
Yeah, well, I think there is like the lunch and learn, right, where you're the one asking a few questions and you're mostly listening. In that case, I will take John Egan from Pinterest, right? He's leading their growth engineering teams, pretty big team. And I feel every time I meet John and we sit down for 30 minutes or 1 hour, I end up learning a lot. So I think is someone I'll take out for lunch and invite. And then if I want like a mix of work, but as well like, discuss things less seriously, I do think Jessica Bisego from Blinkist, she's very efficient and driven, but at the same time she could be very funny. So again, if it depends what the goal of the lunch is, but I would say both of them would be great guests for lunch.
Both good answers. Okay, most important question. What is your favorite type of pancake?
Well, I will say my wife's, she's making those Korean pancakes, which is kind of this, looks more like a donut, I guess you could say. It's with mochi flour, and inside you have like brown sugar, cinnamon, peanuts, and she make them, essentially the night before they rise, and it's fresh cooked in the morning. So that's the best. It beats my dad and my mom's pancakes, French pancakes. And then I dip them in my homemade raspberry jam, which is pretty much the only thing I know how to cook beyond pasta. And
But what
that's
a
my
thing to
favorite.
know how to cook other than like pasta, raspberry jam. That's advanced. That's
Yeah, well, I
amazing.
really like raspberry jam, so I was like, could not convince my wife to do it, so I was like, fine, I will do my own jam, and my daughter is a big fan as well. So
I have to say I'm not I don't play favorites, but that's definitely the best answer to pancake. And also because I've never tried it, now I have a whole image in my head. And at some point next time I'm in the Bay Area, I'm coming for one of those pancakes. It sounds really
yeah,
good.
I could send you there is a premix version of it, if you want to, try to do your own, that you could find I don't know if there is a lot of Korean store around where you live,
There's
but
one. We have one, but it's a 10-minute walk from where I am. And I have to tell you, I'm pregnant now, so any kind of pancake I can get my hand on is like it's a must.
great. Great.
Okay, one more thing. Where can people find you if they want to learn more or see what you have to say?
I'm very active on LinkedIn, so I will say I probably check 2 or 3 times a week because I'm posting there, whether it's about mobile marketing or like this morning, geopolitics, or in mobile games. And Twitter, I'm mostly retweeting, reposting. So I will say LinkedIn is probably the good go-to place if someone want to connect. And please do add a quick message, because I feel it makes a world of a difference when you're like getting a lot of connection requests, knowing why. It doesn't matter how senior or junior you are, but if I know you are at least reaching out for the right reason, right, I'm much more likely to be like, of course, let's connect and let's discuss.
That's an additional marketing tip, mobile growth tip thrown in there. Okay, amazing. Thank you so much for joining us. This was amazing, and I'm looking forward to hearing more, seeing more of what you do.
Thanks, Esther.
And that was Mobile Growth and Pancakes. To find out more about StoreMaven and how we can improve App Store performance, visit storemaven.com. And then make sure to search for Mobile Growth and Pancakes in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found, and click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at StoreMaven, thanks for listening.